Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with Mr. Snyder. And today we have our first lesson. Topic 0 is the review. Lesson 1, we're going to talk about the founding of the colonies and the Revolutionary War. So your learning targets for today are to discuss the European settlement of North America, identify the documents and factors that influences the colonist democratic ideals, talk about the new taxes that were put on the colonists, and talk about why Congress declares independence and the Declaration of Independence itself. So here you can see a map of the Americas in 1650 and match a color to its country. The Spanish basically settled down to the south in Florida and the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America area. The French went north down the St. Lawrence River to Canada and around the Great Lakes, and the English and Dutch kind of stayed along the east coast and basically conquered a lot of the area to the east of the Appalachian Mountains, around the Chesapeake Bay, Boston, current day Virginia area. So the colonies, Virginia is basically the most important colony. It's where the English first settled in 1607 at Jamestown, just recently had their 400th anniversary there. The Virginia planters basically locate around Chesapeake Bay because it's a reliable body of water. And in order to govern themselves, they formed the House of Burgesses, which is the legislature that is appointed to govern the colony in partnership. They have a royal governor that's appointed by the king, but it's important because it's the first legislature that's elected in North America for the purpose of self-governing, with a little bit of help from England with the royal governor, but they're governing themselves over here in America. And now we can basically separate the colonies into 3 sections. New England is in the north, and then you have the middle colonies and the southern colonies. But New England is New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And the English expand northward from Chesapeake Bay, and basically these are Protestants who want to create new, morally pure communities. And their industries in the north are farming, lumber, shipbuilding, and fishing, and also trade and commerce of those things. They'll use the ships that they build to ship things down to the southern colonies. And in 1620, the Pilgrims, so to speak, as they're called, land in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and establish the Mayflower Compact, which is a compact is like a document, a trust, but it's basically establishing self-government of the Plymouth colony. So that is also an important document. The middle colonies, you can see a map there, are Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. And the people settled here because of the religious tolerance offered in these colonies. For example, the pacifist Quakers who settle in Pennsylvania. If you want to know what a Quaker looks like, think of the guy on the Quaker oatmeal box. And their economy exports wheat, so that's what they're important for. They also farm. The southern colonies are North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, and Maryland, and they are basically meddling in cash crops like rice and tobacco. And the harvesting of those hard-to-harvest crops is relying on African Americans, enslaved African Americans, for labor. So that is how their economy is a little bit different. Here you can see basically a summary. So this would be a nice chart to either screenshot or put into your notes there. But the southern colonies basically farm. The northern colonies, or New England colonies, do farming, trade, and commerce. And then the middle colonies are a little bit of both. And that'll come into play here in the next 100 years when we lead up to the Civil War. So the democratic ideals of the colonists were formed by these 2 documents. One is called the Magna Carta, and we're going all the way back to 1215 for this. It forces King John to proclaim certain liberties for his subjects. Before that, it was the king can do whatever he wants. But now he is basically forced under duress to sign this document giving certain liberties to his subjects. One of them was that no subject could be punished except by the law of the land, and that still exists today. And this document influences the writers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So we have some of these ideals in our documents today. And also, the English Bill of Rights lists individual freedoms and limits on the government, and this is kind of what our Bill of Rights and U.S. Constitution is based off of, such as monarchs cannot act as judges, you can't prevent subjects from bearing arms, so that's our Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. There cannot be a standing army without a war. You cannot impose punishment without a fair trial, and you cannot take away certain rights in Parliament, such as free speech. Some of those are in our Bill of Rights as well. This all happens during the period known as the Enlightenment, and the English bring ideas about government and democracy to America. So the Enlightenment is this, it's known as the Age of Reason in Europe, but it teaches that we don't need religion and all of these god-like figures to solve our problems for us. We can solve our problems on our own through human reason. So some of the influencers are Isaac Newton, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, David Hume, Voltaire. The colonists who are well educated, they're the ones who are aware of this enlightenment, and they use these useful ideas and scientific methods to basically come up with ways to improve science, society, law, and they introduce these ideas to solve those problems. John Locke is the Enlightenment thinker who most influenced the U.S. government. His ideas are that the powers of the government should be separated into different branches. That's why we have a legislative, executive, and judicial branch in our U.S. government. And also, he says that every human is endowed with natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are property rights, stuff. You're allowed to have stuff that the government cannot take away except through due process. And so that, if that sounds familiar, it's because it's in our Declaration of Independence. The social contract theory that goes along with John Locke is that the government rests on popular consent. We, as citizens of the government, give up rights to the government in exchange for protection of other rights. And if those rights are not protected, our natural rights, then we have the right to overthrow that government. And that's the idea behind the Declaration of Independence. And this all happens during the period known as the Great Awakening, or the First Great Awakening, and it's a religious movement. You would think that the Enlightenment ideas would move us away from religion, but it actually moved us toward religion, because we have these spontaneous Protestant revivals going on, and new churches are birthed during this time because people have their own ideas about religion, and questioning previous religions and breaking away and creating new churches, and other people like these ideas, so we have rising church attendance. Both the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening lead to ideas of, if we don't need people to tell us how to worship, if we don't need people to tell us how to think, then we don't need people to tell us how to govern either. And this leads us into the 1750s, or the French and Indian War, which was the last major war fought before the American Revolution. It takes about 9 years, and it's the Britain and certain Indian tribes versus the French and certain Indian tribes in the New World. Britain and France fought a whole bunch of wars in Europe during the past 100 years before this, and they bring their fight to the New World, fighting over colonies. Britain wins, but it was very, very expensive. And so this basically kicks the French out of the New World. Great Britain spends itself into a lot of debt winning this war, and Great Britain tended to blame the colonists for not contributing enough to the war, so they tax the colonists. And the colonists do not appreciate this because they don't have a voice in Parliament for those taxes, and they feel that the English Bill of Rights is being violated. So they boycott, protest, and resist paying these taxes. And this sentiment, this disagreement, is what leads to the American Revolution. Here are some of the taxes that they were put on them. The Sugar Act. The main ones to know would be we don't care about the Quartering Act, but that's in our Bill of Rights, that you can't make a soldier stay in a person's house. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and the Coercive or Intolerable Acts were passed after the Boston Tea Party. And here is another view of it. It's those same acts of parliament, but then what rights were violated. And so you don't need to write all of this down. It just kind of gives you some context. They're all no taxation without consent, no trial by jury, no standing army in peacetime. So their rights are being violated, they feel. And so we basically have two factions of people now in America: the loyalists, who do not wish to resist. They want to pay these taxes because they've got a pretty good life and they don't want to give it up. They've never had to really pay taxes before, but now they do, and basically they're paying their fair share, and they want to remain a loyal part of Britain, the loyalists. But some colonists begin to resist by boycotting these goods, and this puts economic pressure on Great Britain. And this talk of independence starts, and these people are known as patriots. So we have the loyalists versus the patriots. And this leads all of this talk, Boston Tea Party, Boston Massacre, which you've learned in your studies before, leads up to the American Revolution. And in September 1774, we have the First Continental Congress, where they meet in Philadelphia to discuss a response to the Intolerable Acts. And we call them intolerable because we don't think they're tolerable, basically. And because they were punishment for the Boston Tea Party. Basically, the First Continental Congress doesn't get anything done. And in April 1775, the first battles of the American Revolution in Lexington and Concord begin, and the war begins between the British troops and the colonists. Ralph Waldo Emerson called it the shot heard around the world. In May 1775, you have the Second Continental Congress meeting in response to those attacks, and this is basically our first de facto national government, our first Congress until 1781. So between May of 75 and July of 76, we've got some issue. People are saying, should we be doing this? Should we be rebelling against our mother country? And in July 1776, they finally say, yes, we should. Officially, they create and draft and sign the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson put the most work into it, although it was created by a committee of 5, and it's adopted by Congress on July 4th. What it does is it asserts those natural rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, says that they're not being protected and that we have the right to overthrow the government, and it lists 30 or so grievances against King George of England. And in that one document, it basically expresses all of the ideals of the Enlightenment and the purpose of government that was going on during the Enlightenment. We're now not a part of the British Empire, and we're now independent states. We win the American Revolution with military assistance from France and great leadership by General George Washington. France is Britain's biggest rival, so of course they're willing to help us out. And we've had a good relationship with France throughout our history. We defeat the British at the Siege of Yorktown. They surrender British General Cornwallis and they surround him and force him to surrender. And then we officially signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783, 2 years later, which says we're independent from Britain, and it gives us some very favorable boundaries at that point. Florida to the south, which is still owned by Spain. Mississippi River to the west, so that includes Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, which will eventually be called the Northwest Territory, and the Great Lakes. Above that is Canada, which is still British-owned, and Spain gets Florida, and everything west of the Mississippi River. And that's basically this lesson, so go ahead and fill out those learning targets. Write down or note any questions you have, and I'll see you in class tomorrow. Bye-bye.